Back in the 30s, 40s, it was a very simple city. I remember I was out in front on Gale Drive. Some kid who was about 9 o'clock in the morning came running down the street yelling, "The Japanese have bombed Pearl Harbor." I didn't know where Pearl Harbor was.
My dad came home from playing golf, and he said the Japanese had bombed Pearl Harbor. And I was like 8, I guess, and I was so frightened. I pictured the Japanese army marching down Olympic.
When war came to America, the citizens of Beverly Hills stepped forward. Among the 12 million Americans in uniform were plenty of our local boys, including Navy Commander Douglas Fairbanks, Jr., who led a force of 16 ships landing in southern France. He earned both the Legion of Merit and the Silver Star. Air Corps Private James Stewart flew at least 20 combat missions and ultimately rose to the rank of colonel on his discharge in 1945. The biggest stars of the day, like Danny Kaye, gave their time to lift the morale and bring a smile to our fighting men. As did Bedford Drive's own Lana Turner, who offered the GIs a fantasy of the rarest of delicacies, a steak.
Oh, well, here it is, fellas. Beautiful. A porterhouse steak 3 inches thick. The only one in captivity.
You gonna give that a hot foot?
Into the frying pan.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. There you are, fellas. That's the sound of a steak sizzling. And, fellas, I wish I could cook a big steak for each and every one of you.
Other local entertainers took off to the combat zones. Roxbury Drive's Jack Benny, Walden's Joey Brown, Elm's Danny Thomas with Marlene Dietrich, even Edward G. Robinson could all be found in the jungles, deserts, and hospitals where they were most needed. Sales of war stamps funded our own B-24 bomber, the spirit of Beverly Hills schools.
Every Wednesday for months, Pickfair has been turned over to the USO. Soldiers, sailors, Marines enjoy the luxury of a swim in the pool, play gin rummy, and have lunch with some of Hollywood's loveliest girls.
Besides giving lonely GIs a dance at the Hollywood Canteen, local residents like Roxbury Drive's Betty Grable and Bedford Drive's Ann Sheridan traveled millions of miles to bring a touch of home to the front lines. Bedford Drive resident Marlene Dietrich hated Hitler so much she offered to go on a date with him and kill him when alone in his bedroom. Unfortunately, she never figured out where to hide the murder weapon. The roof of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel served as the perfect lookout for civil defense wardens like Alfred Hitchcock and Stan Laurel as they scanned the skies for enemy aircraft. Cesar Romero and Buster Keaton headed up a volunteer station wagon brigade. Have you ever seen so many Woodies?
My father was an air raid warden. He had his tin hat and his band for his arm and his flashlight, and he was allowed to go into people's houses if they left their lights on and turn them off. And we used to put blue cellophane paper over our headlights and our cars because they said the Japanese were coming and they were going to bomb Beverly Hills.
It was my dad's responsibility to make sure that if the Japanese were going to invade Beverly Hills, that my dad was the one to push the button and to hit the siren.
The great Los Angeles air raid in 1942, and the sirens went off and the guns went off, and you don't forget something like that.
We belonged to a women's, what was it called? Women's Emergency Corps. And we would march down Wilshire Boulevard when they had marches, the soldiers sometimes would march and bands would march down Wilshire Boulevard. And we would march right with them in our little uniforms.
On El Camino and Olympic, it was a big empty lot on the southeast corner. And we had a victory garden.
I've been using only the very best fertilizer.
Fertilizer?
Well, certainly. What have you been using?
On my tomatoes, I always put mayonnaise.
Our lives were fairly normal. There was rationing. It was hard to get meat sometimes. Gas was rationed, like 5 gallons a week. And there were no new cars being produced because the automobile manufacturers, they were making tanks.
I'd like to give up my Maxwell to the salvage drive. I'm Jack Benny, the movie star.
Well, I never happen to have seen you in pictures.
Well, that's not the point. Are you going to take that car or not?
Yes, we're taking anything.
Never did that before.
On the home front, Many of our local residents, like Harry Warner and Carl Lemley, worked openly to rescue refugees from the Nazis. And our local residents bought more war bonds per capita than any city in the country.
So we were affected by knowing people that had passed away. I think about Ian Elliott. He was a 4-year letterman, all-league. He entered World War II and became a pilot of one of those bombers. He had completed 25 successful missions, but he wanted to stay with his group. And the next flight, the plane crashed and he was killed, and he never came back. He was about 18 years old and he never lived a life, this remarkable young man. There's 100 of our alums that are in the War Memorial.
The big change was after the war, though, when all the soldiers started coming back and the place started expanding, and it no longer was a small burg, but it was becoming a major city.